Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This network is supported by our listeners. You can become a supporting member by going to arcpodnet.com/members and signing up. As a supporting member, you have access to high-quality downloads of each show and a discount at our future online store, and access to show hosts on a members-only Slack team. For professional members, we'll have training shows and other special content offered throughout the year. Once again, go to arcpodnet.com/members to support the network and get some great extras and swag in the process. That's arcpodnet.com/members.
Ancient tools and burials, plants and seeds, Neanderthals.
Welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast, episode 78. I'm your host, Sarah Head, and I'm joined today by my co-hosts, Ken Fader and Jeb Card. And today we're joined by Dr. Donna Yates from the University of Glasgow. Some of her best-known work is on the Trafficking Culture blog, where she discusses the illegal antiquities trade. She's here to discuss the recent Hobby Lobby decision, where the federal authorities have fined the company $3 million for their illegal importation of antiquities from the Middle East. Dr. Yates also talks to us about the illegal antiquities trade and about the laws that are set up in the hopes of protecting antiquities across the globe. Get ready to think critically.
You will see are a staple of archaeology. But we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Head, and I'm joined today by Ken Fader and Jeb Card. How's it going, guys?
Life's a carnival, Sarah. Everything's good.
Ken just had a big life event, didn't he?
Well, yes. So now I have a 31-year-old son, a 24-year-old son, and a 12-day-old daughter. So
congratulations!
So yes, it's
Congratulations!
Yeah, hey, thanks. It's been, apparently I'm a breeder. But little Molly, we love her. She's a delightful little kid. And
awesome.
And again, if you hear a baby crying in the background, I'm just going to blame it on Jeb.
Yeah, that seems to be how everything goes. So it's all fair. And that's my update. So let's get to the matter at hand.
Okay. And today we're joined by special guest Donna Yates out of the University of Glasgow. How's it going?
It's going well. I'm happy to be here to talk about this.
And thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Donna's going to be here to talk to us about the illegal antiquities trade and the recent Hobby Lobby decisions that have been handed down. This is like a 2-year-old case that's been in the news off and on. Donna, can you give us a little background on yourself, and then we'll jump right into the topic?
Yeah, so I am an archaeologist, and I start off by saying that because I'm an archaeologist in a criminology department. So I'm at the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research at the University of Glasgow, and I'm a lecturer in antiquities trafficking and art crime. I'm a founding member of the Trafficking Culture Project, and for the past 5 or so years, we've been focusing in on the transnational illicit trade in cultural objects, usually from an archaeological standpoint, but kind of bringing in these criminological ideas to understand it better.
I think I have probably talked on the show previously about traffickingculture.org, which is the website for that, because it's an astonishingly useful resource. I use it heavily in my classes as well as other purposes. I assign readings from it. I assign to my students, and I've also cited your discussion of what could be lost with because you started life to some degree kind of working on my archaeology.
Absolutely.
Your piece on the Buena Vista del Cayo vase and all that could be lost, because I recently did a thing with a hieroglyphic bottle in El Salvador, which has some vague parallels. And I also absolutely love the name, and I'd love you to explain the name of one of your blogs, which is Anonymous Swiss Collector. What does that mean?
Well, the original title was a full property of an anonymous Swiss collector, but I've streamlined it into something that's still quite long. But when I was just finishing my PhD, I felt like I had a lot more to say about the looting and trafficking of antiquities, the antiquities market. But thankfully, I got a job afterwards, so I can say it academic publications. But right then in that in-between stage, I decided to start a blog. And there's kind of this trope in antiquities sales. And if you look at any auction catalog of antiquities, be it Maya antiquities, Greek antiquities, Indian antiquities, you see the provenance or ownership history of these antiquities as listed as very opaque. So they'll say things like property of an American collector, or property from a private collector or collection.
I mean, and you're not paraphrasing. Like, it would literally say like an American collector.
Right. And then one of the most common tropes is property of an anonymous Swiss collector. And I during my master's, I did my master's research on South American antiquities in major auction catalogs, and I typed property of anonymous Swiss collector so many times that I decided that was the name of my blog. So it's kind of a way of hiding the history of antiquities when they're in sale. That it's giving a nod to the idea that there might be a past for the antiquities without actually revealing that past.
Yeah.
And often these anonymous Swiss collectors didn't actually exist. Property of an anonymous Swiss collector, an old family collection, is actually pretty much recently out of the ground.
Yeah. Wow. No, I've been using that as kind of a code phrase in my class when we're talking about museums, talking about collectors and looting and all these problems. It's like, oh, where's it from? The anonymous Swiss collector. When? 1 or 2 years before the laws came in.
Exactly. So just right before the UNESCO convention.
Exactly. 1968, 69, whatever.
Yeah. Can you give us a little bit of background on these laws that this anonymous Swiss collector is trying to skirt?
Well, it's different for every country. So every country has slightly different laws when it comes to antiquities. But one of the big ones is the UNESCO convention. Not really a law, but the 1970.
Like a framework, right?
It's a framework. But the year 1970 kind of draws a line in the sand for some people. After the point where UNESCO gets involved and says this is a major issue, the trafficking of antiquities is wrong, we need to do something better, there's kind of no way anybody can say they didn't know about it. There's no way anybody can say, I had no idea that trafficking of antiquities was an issue. So 1970 is that line. It's important to remember that's not a legal line. You're not actually necessarily breaking any laws if you've bought an antiquity after 1970, but it's kind of this moral line that's been adopted, both in the trade and kind of among some academics. But it depends on the country otherwise. If say it was 1906 in Bolivia, when Bolivia claimed all archaeological objects as property of the state, you might want to project things before 1906. It's a bit far back. Bolivia was a bit earlier than other countries. But for some countries, it might be 1950. India is either 1972 or 73, or it might be 1970. Can't remember. But you'd place everything before that date, whatever the relevant date was.
And the UNESCO Charter, we actually talked about this in our episode on the executive order in the United States about the American government, the federal government's Antiquities Act. We talked a bit about, while it wasn't directly related, since we're talking about all the sort of laws in the U.S., we talked about the UNESCO Charter and how what it's really doing is governing relations between states with memoranda of understanding. So Bolivia can be like, look, this is something is illegal to be doing in 1906, and if once you got to New Orleans in 1907, they're like, we don't care. The UNESCO is basically making signatories care and making them make agreements.
It's facilitating those relationships between states.
Yeah.
It is very state to state based, which is positive because there's an international framework for that. Negative if you're talking about objects that maybe aren't being claimed by states, maybe they're being claimed by indigenous groups within the states, and states aren't involved. But it is this kind of state to state thing. It's kind of forcing this discussion to happen.
So the reason we asked you to come on, I mean, we've been wanting you to be on the show for a while because this concept, we deal a lot, archaeological fantasies and, haunted objects and all of that. People believe in these things. And I've written a lot about how, or I'm going to be writing a lot once it comes out, about how when you erase real histories, other ones rush in and they often reflect Western fantasies. If you go back to our Mummy's Curse episode, you'll find that. But the reason we asked you on right now, this made perfect sense, was there's been a lot of recent news about that the United States Department of Justice made a settlement with Hobby Lobby, the company Hobby Lobby. And this is not new. The settlement's new, but the case is not new. And you and others of Trafficking Culture have written about this. Can you tell us a bit more about what our listeners need to know?
Okay. Well, the basic background of this case is a fellow named Green, who is the multi-billionaire owner of Hobby Lobby, the U.S.-based craft store, is also, he's a very prominent evangelical Christian, and he has a strong collecting interest in items from the Holy Land. So anything from the world of the Bible. So not necessarily directly biblical things, but things from the general sphere of the Bible.
Southwest Asia, Egypt, basically.
Exactly.
Eastern Mediterranean.
I have a quick question, though. Is his collecting in and of itself an illegal activity, or just the way he was maybe going about it was the illegal part of this?
So collecting antiquities in itself is not illegal. It is, in the United States, for example, it's perfectly legal to own antiquities. They just can't be stolen property.
Gotcha.
And they can't be property that has been brought into the United States in an illegal manner. And it can't be property that's subject to any sort of international sanction.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, we're dealing with all three potentially.
Gotcha.
So it is legal in the United States to buy, sell, and own antiquities that don't violate those rules. Whether we think that's ethical or not, well, that's a different story.
Right. A question that I'd like to add right now is, this guy's collection proclivities, are these about personal acquisition so he can have them in his basement, or is there some goal in terms of exhibiting these artifacts?
Well, there seems to be a bit of both. So the other thing that Green is known for is he's the force behind this soon-to-be opened Museum of the Bible in D.C. And yes,
I've seen that going up.
I think August. I want to say August or September or something like that.
Oh, seriously?
Right?
No, yeah, it's real. It's a real
thing.
thing.
I think is really soon, like in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. I think it's open to the public around November. I think the grand opening is in the next couple of weeks.
And it is not part of the Smithsonian at all. It is its own thing.
God, no.
Right.
There are a number of private museums in DC.
Yeah.
And this is one of those. Yeah.
It's one of those private museums. And it does have a evangelical focus and component. But another side of it is that part of the vision, or at least the stated vision, was that this was going to become a center of research for archaeological objects in Holy Land. The problem, of course, is that to outfit an entire museum currently, you don't have the, in quotation marks, benefit of empire, conquest, or any of the dubious past activities that filled major world museums before.
Right.
You have to get this stuff from somewhere. And at least one source of these objects is the illicit market. Whether they directly engage with the obviously illicit market or not, or if they're just buying unprovenance antiquities. But of course, these antiquities have to come from somewhere.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but so, like I said, the settlement is the news. This has been going on for several years. And if I remember correctly, there were press announcements. Again, if I am wrong, I apologize. There were press announcements about the Museum of the Bible where they're like, we're going to, because they made some deal here, and you probably know much more about this, so I'm not going to talk about it, but where they were like, we're going to have like several numbers or dollars worth or something of artifacts, and literally people started going, and you're going to do that in 2 years, and you're going to do that how exactly?
Yeah.
And that's when people started looking at them a little more carefully.
Yeah, I those kind of press releases or discussions I kind of heard around the Antiquities trafficking water cooler.
This is an interesting water cooler. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one. It's a very murky water cooler, very murky place.
That sounds very unappetizing the way you just put
cups of mud.
It's terrible.
But appropriate.
But no, yeah. So they started making a big public splash about this, saying that this was going to be this great institution, this public institution, this research institution, and exactly like you said, the various people who are experts both in material, just actual archaeologists who work in this region, as well as those of us who watch the illicit trade, we all went, wait a minute, that's That's impossible. How are you going to do that? How is that possible? So, as you said, this is a topic that's been coming up for a couple years now since they made these announcements, because all of us have said, well, how do you think you're going to do that? So they've received a lot of criticism, both publicly and privately, about their ability to do this. And I know that they've made certain agreements with some countries about displaying some objects, and they have like loan agreements from private collections, which doesn't necessarily mean those collections are clean, but also the purchasing of antiquities from a region that for the past couple of decades has been in a state of extreme upheaval. Well, it's not looking pretty good. So they started getting some decent criticism and some strong advice to stay away from it.
Before we get to the purchase, which I think is going to be a lot of what we talk about, given what's happened, you mentioned agreements. And actually, if you could clarify something for me, when people started talking about some of these agreements, I heard criticisms of this. And again, I am just paraphrasing what people were saying, but basically people almost referring to this as the return of the partition system. One, could you tell our audience what the part, maybe better than I can, what the partition system is or was, and two, are those accurate or reasonable criticisms, or is it an appropriate analogy?
Well, the partition system, or the partage, was.
I didn't know there was another word.
But both of them, partage.
Okay.
It's fancier. You see partage.
We're very educated.
Yeah. So basically, in the kind of the earlier periods of archaeology in West Asia, in Egypt, in that region, and also some other places as well, there would be agreements struck between the excavators or whatever organization or museum that they worked for and the government that was issuing permits to essentially divide the antiquities that were found between them. So if you were, say, Sir Flinders Petrie rolling into Egypt, you would have an agreement with whoever was in charge of Egypt at the time that meant that Egypt kept some percentage of the finds, and Petrie's organization, so at times various museums and so on, kept a portion of the objects. And those objects legally left Egypt and sometimes, controversially, I should say, enter the market and so on and so forth. So that is this that's when the large museums gained collections of archaeologically excavated objects, and those created teaching collections at universities. And a lot of people see that as a very positive system, where the organizations that front these archaeological digs get something in return. However, in many cases, these were colonial governments. They were not governments that represented the people. The power imbalance was not right. And none of this works in law anymore after many of these governments have declared ownership of all these objects. They can't actually just get rid of them or give them away. So that's the partition system, the partage system.
This generally doesn't exist anymore, right?
No, I can't think of anywhere that would exist anymore. I as an archaeologist, everywhere I've worked, would just think we were crazy if you rolled into the Ministry of Culture and said, I think I'm going to be taking half of these. Let's work that out. And their response would be, you're lucky you have a permit to be here. Go write your academic papers. That's what you get. But
isn't it before the discovery of Tut's tomb? Didn't Carnarvon and Carter and the Egyptian government have an agreement like that?
Yeah. And there are a number of kind of Carter excavated objects out of Egypt, but kind of the Tut's tomb thing, Egypt kind of put some screeching brakes on that one.
Yeah, that was kind of the catalyst for the change.
Sure.
So did Mr. Green try to say that he had this kind of agreement and that's how he was getting his artifacts, or is this just a criticism that was leveled at him?
I think I hadn't heard this, but this sounds like a criticism that would be leveled at him. That this it kind of relates to this argument that taking antiquities off the market saves them, and at least they're in a museum,
right?
And this also there's a constant argument that it's good that we're spreading antiquities around throughout the world, And that's coming out of this partage idea, this partitioning of antiquities idea. So this argument that, or this assertion in the buildup of the Museum of the Bible that we're bringing these biblical artifacts to a non-Middle Eastern, not war-torn situation so everybody can study them. Well, it is sounding a lot like this kind of semi-colonial earlier period of archaeology where the balance of power was swayed in one direction and the other side isn't really agreeing to it.
We talked a lot about this idea of civilization and bringing things to the rest of the world in our episode with Nathan French a few weeks ago on Islamic State, where again, a lot of the same words and a lot of the same kind of rhetoric is something we see today as a reaction or using excuse of or whatever Islamic State and things that were happening 100 years ago.
Right, and it implies that local groups, I mean, again, it's implying local groups can't take care of their own stuff. So here, give it to us. We can do such a better job.
I can't imagine that this green fellow is sitting in front of his computer, scouring eBay sites for buying stuff. Does he have experts? Does he have people in his employ who are going out there and finding these collections that will be appropriate or not for his museum?
Well, Ken, I think that would be a fantastic thing. So I think we do have to go to break. I think that'd be a fantastic question because some of that, I believe, is covered either in the discussion of the settlement or in some of the news coverage around it, because there actually are some particulars to that.
Okay, so why don't we start up with that after the break?
Yeah, let's go to break real quick, and when we come back, we will discuss where these wonderful items are coming from.
Stay cool and choose from over 40 in-stock ceiling fans for under $100, plus an 11% rebate at Menards. We carry the largest selection of in-stock Hunter ceiling fans, available in a variety of designs, finishes, and features. Create the perfect look and lighting for any room with a new Hunter ceiling fan. Visit Menards.com and view our entire selection of Hunter ceiling fans, plus the weekly flyer and other great deals going on now.
Save big money at Menards.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Hey podcast fans, check out the ARC365 podcast at www.arcpodnet.com/ARC365. That's ARCH365 for your daily dose of archaeology. Each episode is less than 15 minutes long, and we have some great guests recording about awesome archaeology. We also try to throw in some definitions and basic archaeological information. So, check out the 365 Days of Archaeology podcast only in 2017 at www.arcpodnet.com/ARC365 today. Find us also on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Google Music by typing ARC365 into the search. Now back to the show.
Hey everyone, we are back and we are still talking with Donna Yates about the Antiquities trade and more specifically Hobby Lobby. And we hit on a really interesting thing before we went to break there.
Yeah, I had cut off Ken because Ken had asked a question that I think that was going to take a little bit of time and kind of gets to the heart of a lot of this. He had asked, how did this happen? Like, were they sending their own agents into the field, or was it like,
exactly.
Did they go to a strip mall in, like
illegal antiquity strip mall
in Cairo, or it was like, it's right next to the e-cigs place and like the tattoo parlors, or is that how this works, or?
Antiquities while you wait.
Yeah, exactly. So
Antiquities are us.
We actually know some of the mechanisms that went down in these deals. So what's going on?
Well, in this case, it's similar to a lot of cases. Green is probably not browsing eBay on his phone, but might. I don't know what he does in his spare time. But he almost certainly has some degree of agents that work for him in certain ways. He may have a personal relationship with certain dealers. He almost certainly does. But his collection does have hired curators, for example. I know this from Shoots. I've met one of them. There are people that he has hired that at least deal with the collection, can provide advice, and to some degree may have been serving as some sort of pre-buyer or in that kind of capacity.
And these are people with knowledge of antiquities.
Yeah, these are people who are hired curators. They're experts in the field. You or I might not particularly see ourselves working for a private collector of antiquities for ethical reasons. Other people don't quite see it that way. They're still perfectly well trained.
Like that kind of professional background. Okay.
Exactly. But on the other side of this, in to particularly the acquisition we're talking about, as well as some other acquisitions, the paperwork that came out of this case clearly indicates that Green was discussing this issue with high-end independent experts. So people who he didn't employ full-time, who didn't have to make him happy because their jobs may have depended on it. And at least one of the people that he spoke to was Professor Patty Gerstenblatt. And I can say that it's her because her name has been revealed in the news, who is a professor of law at DePaul University and also has a PhD in Middle Eastern archaeology. And she is the former head of the State Department's Cultural Property Advisory Committee. So this is the committee that decides which bilateral antiquities agreements the United States enters into under the UNESCO Convention. So when we're talking about experts, this is the highest possible expert that he could be talking about.
Absolutely,
Patty Gerstenblatt is the top here. And she has very publicly stated that the Green collection came to her in a formal capacity, asked about this particular collection, whether it was dodgy, whether they should go through with it. And she said that I think the quote is, threw the book at him with how bad of an idea this is.
Oh, God. Okay.
And they still proceeded with the purchase anyway. So they were asking questions.
So they were pretty well warned.
They were so well warned. I can't even imagine a better person to talk about this, that you have this absolute top expert saying, both as an archaeologist, both as a lawyer, and as somebody who's engaging in the highest levels of the U.S.'s import and export regulation around antiquities, saying, don't do this, and then you make the other decision. Whoa.
It would be fascinating if she ever got a drink with Sally Yates, but I digress.
Well,
I'd like to hang out with those two.
That'd be a fun conversation.
At some point, one of the Hobby Lobby's lawyers, in fact, said, well, we're new at this, so forgive us for our naivete, and in essence, professing ignorance.
I'm pretty sure that's how law works, isn't it? Isn't that how law works?
You mean they lie?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it says ignorance of the law is not defense against the law somewhere.
Right.
Somewhere.
But then again, you can't even say that they were ignorant of the law, because they had
not at that point
an absolute top expert, at least one, probably others, but at least one of the highest rung telling you.
Maybe their attention had slipped. You don't know. Maybe they were really into watching House of Cards at that point or something.
A squirrel ran through the room. Squirrel
shiny off in the corner, and they were looking at that while she was telling them this is not a good idea.
Jesus Christ.
And while they were filling out the false customs declarations, and so it's one of those things where again they do have people. The Greens are so fabulously wealthy. They're multi-billionaires. They have the ability to hire people to help them out. They have curators on the payroll. They did seek out advice from lawyers, from experts. They just chose not to follow that advice. And
so why did they even look for that information then? I mean, if they were they just like trying to figure out how much of the law they were going to end up breaking, or were they hoping that, I mean, maybe they were hoping that like they weren't actually going to be breaking the law, and then people were like, no, this is a bad idea, and then they're like, whatever.
Yeah.
I would bet that's it.
Like they just didn't think they were going to be breaking the law at all?
Yeah. I mean, if you start out with a situation where whoever's trying to sell this stuff to you is telling you, oh, it's fine, oh, it's fine, oh, it's fine, they probably were hoping for some sort of positive response. Because in a sense, the buying of illicit antiquities is a pretty risky crime, I'm sorry to say. It's very difficult to make antiquities cases stick. It's very difficult to prove that something was stolen from a particular country because, of course, ancient borders are different than modern ones. Prove it came from Iraq and not Syria. for example. All of this stuff is very difficult. So for the most part, if they've been buying antiquities, if they have friends who buy antiquities, if they're in this kind of circle, they're being told, well, whatever the experts may say, it's really low risk for you. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, it was low risk for them. The thing that they really messed up on in this case is that they broke U.S. law by filing a false customs claim.
So the false, can we talk more about that specifically?
Yeah. So what happened was they imported these items into the U.S. In a odd roundabout way, and one of the odd roundabout ways they did it is that they didn't declare that they had 5,000 Iraqi antiquities coming into the United States. The customs declaration form said that they had tile samples.
Yeah, ceramic tile.
And they didn't ship it to their houses.
That's a violation of U.S. law.
Right, and they weren't shipping them to the house either. They were shipping them to their stores, right?
Well, that's where you'd have the ceramic tile samples.
Well, exactly.
Right, yeah. So it wasn't, as far as I know, again, and we'll have to look at the exact paperwork to see if that's the case, but that this was being imported under the auspices of Hobby Lobby, so their business, not as, Mr. and Mrs. Green,
I have the actual. So first of all, our audience wants to look at this. I am looking at the Justice Department of the United States' announcement on this. I think it's dated 5 July 2017 for immediate release. Is title, if you want to Google it, United States files civil action to forfeit thousands of ancient Iraqi artifacts imported by Hobby Lobby. Now, this is their press release. This is basically announcing the settlement. In their words, this is from the Department of Justice. With Hobby Lobby's consent, a UAE, United Arab Emirates, based dealer shipped packages containing artifacts to 3 different corporate addresses in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Between 1 and 3 shipments arrived at a time without the required customs entry documentation being filed with CBP, which is Customs and Border Patrol, I believe, and bore shipping labels that falsely, again, this is the Department of Justice, I am quoting, that falsely and misleadingly describe their contents as, quote, ceramic tiles, unquote, or, quote, ceramic tiles, parenthesis, sample, unquote. After approximately 10 packages shipped in this manner received by Hobby Lobby and its affiliates, Customs and Border Patrol intercepted 5 shipments. And then there's more, but these were no further shipments, but when a package containing approximately 1,000 clay bullae, which are for holding tokens or related to information technology from Mesopotamia, from the same purchase received by Hobby Lobby, was shipped from an Israeli dealer and accompanied by a false declaration stating that the bullae's country of origin was Israel. So that is from the Department of Justice.
So there you go. That's where there was the big mess up in their smuggling scheme, so to speak. They were falsifying these customs documents in hopes that the items wouldn't be open.
And these are clay objects.
Yeah. So if nobody
opens,
exactly, if nobody opens the case, it feels about the right size. If the customs agent who opens it up doesn't really know what they're looking at, they might say, okay, well, these are tiles. But what they did is they violated U.S. law by illegally importing objects, by falsely declaring their imports, which means that you move it out of a situation where you have to prove that this item is looted or stolen. You move it out of a situation where you have to prove that this left Iraq in violation of United Nations sanctions, and you moved it into this easy place within the U.S. You've just violated straight out U.S. law. It would have been the same if you falsely declared a shipment of yarn and knitting needles because it's Hobby Lobby,
So here's the really scary question that I have. If they hadn't falsely declared these things as tile samples and had just said, Iraqi tablets or something, or told what it was, would they not be in trouble right now?
That is the scariest question, and the answer is maybe. It's maybe hard to get these to stick, these charges of antiquities being entrapped to stick, because of all of the burden of evidence you have to come up with to prove that they were looted, to prove they were stolen, to prove they were trafficked, to prove they're Iraqi at all. If they had declared it properly, well, who knows?
Yeah, and the funny part is, I think they may have tripped up because they were using an old smut technique. E.A. Wallace Budge, the keeper of the British Museum's Egypt section in the late Victorian and early Edwardian period over a century ago, he did the exact same thing. He moved human remains from Egypt to the United Kingdom, and he labeled them bone meal.
Oh, no.
Yes, it is the exact same thing. So I almost wonder if they kind of I don't know. I don't want to speculate on motives.
Yeah, well, this is something we've seen in a number of recent antiquities cases as well. There's been a big, ongoing, gigantic case about Indian antiquities that centers around a New York-based dealer named Subhash Kapoor, who has been on trial in India for the past, 7 years at this point. His trial is stalled because the case grows and grows and grows against more people. But he imported stolen Indian idols into the United States, and they eventually ended up in Australia, quite a circuitous route, listing them as stone garden furniture.
Oh, geez.
Stone garden furniture. Sure. But his didn't get open.
If you put it in the garden, I guess that's what it becomes.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
But they were actually made of bronze, so they weren't even stone. So there's
there we go.
So here's a question, though. Since it's so terribly hard to prosecute these things, it seems like it's a very low-level risk to just simply declare them. So where's the benefit of trying to be deceptive like this? Or can we speculate on that?
Yeah, the question is, what is the benefit? I don't actually know. And again, maybe they're not so adept at antiquity smuggling cases that they know that they're probably not going to face charges otherwise. Maybe they're just trying to be sneaky.
I feel kind of bad saying all this online. It's like, hey, don't take that. Yeah. Don't take this away from us saying that you could do that.
Yeah. No, certainly they know. Certainly they know they're doing something wrong. Can we even speculate that their feeling is there's a greater good involved here? That yes, these little laws that apply to antiquities, yes, we are circumventing them, we're skirting them, but we're going to have this museum that will tell the story of the Bible. And
Donna,
more important.
Donna, before you answer that, I do want to make clear in it. So I want to make this sort of as part of the backdrop before you answer that, because I think that gets to this. They paid a $3 million fine to the United States government. That's my understanding. Something like that.
Like that, yeah.
Yeah,
and they turned over the object.
That's where I was going with this. And the artifacts are being repatriated. So I did want to put that in there. So anyway, that's because it gets to the cost and benefit.
Yeah. But I'm glad you asked that question because I actually have some hot criminological research that answers that.
Okay, well, before
part of the work. Oh, go ahead.
Actually, before we get into that, let's go to break real quick. I know it's early, but let's go to break, and when we get back, you can tell us about this awesome hot evidence, and I don't have to interrupt you in the middle of it.
Okay.
Perfect.
Interested in archaeology? Want to hear from experts in the field about the latest discoveries and interpretations? Check out the Archaeology Show every other Saturday and let hosts Chris Webster and April Camp Whitaker take you deeper into the story. Check out the Archaeology Show at www.archpodnet.com/archaeology and subscribe, rate, and comment on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and the Google Music Store. That's www.archpodnet.com/archaeology. Now back to the show.
What makes for a great vacation? Depends on who you ask. Are you looking to get away or bring everyone together? Do you want to get outside and play or see a play at the plate? Fortunately, however you operate, I'm the destination you've been looking for. The name's Missouri, but you can call me Mo. And I have just one question. What's your MO? Come see me at visitmo.com.
Hey everyone, and we are back, and we are still talking with Dr. Donna Yates about the Illegal Antiquities Act, and you were telling us that you have hot forensic evidence, which I love forensic evidence, so let's do this.
It's more criminological, so we're a little bit less than forensic, but the question was, were the Greens, were the Hobby Lobby folks, were they telling themselves that they were doing something for the benefit of humanity? Were they breaking the law?
It's the greater good argument.
But the greater good. And what's quite interesting is that this is a strong bit of research in criminology. So in the 1950s, there were two researchers, Sykes and Matza, moving into the 1960s, who were looking at youth crime, so just regular juvenile delinquent type crime, nothing to do with antiquities. And they noticed that the kids who were committing crimes had patterns of almost telling themselves stories that made the trauma of having committed a crime just a bit less. It kind of blunted this kind of societal stigma inside their heads for committing the crime. So they called these neutralization techniques. And these were certain ways that the kids neutralized their actions, put them within a different context, recontextualized them, and kind of explained away their behavior that is otherwise criminal. And some of the research that trafficking culture has been doing, particularly with my colleague Simon McKenzie, Professor Simon McKenzie, who is a criminologist, has been on how collectors and dealers engage in these same neutralization techniques. And one of the things that we see in dealers is this classic Sykes and Matza neutralization technique of appealing to higher loyalties. And I think that's exactly what you're getting at. It's this idea that, yes, I'm breaking the law. Yes, I'm knowingly breaking the law. Yes, I am engaging in a dirty market. I'm buying antiquities straight out of a war zone. I know that it's a war zone. I've talked to the experts. They've told me not to do it, but I have a higher purpose. There are higher loyalties here. I am saving the objects and I'm putting them in a museum. And of course, that is a very persuasive argument, both internally and externally, but it is a way of explaining away doing exactly what you want to do. It's not usually the core motivation for the action. It's a subsidiary explanation for just kind of engaging in deviant behavior that you want to do. I think that was definitely a part of it, this appealing to higher loyalties.
And I want to get into whether that's accurate, because saying that are they saving these things? Of course, all of these things are coming out of the ground without provenience. They're losing all their archaeological provenience. Also, whenever we're dealing with this sort of a situation, this is where fakes get in. There have been estimates that like very high percentages of things in museums and collections are fakes, and often it's hard to tell without chemical testing or expert understanding even then. So all of that is a problem. So are things actually being saved with these kinds of activities?
Well, it depends on what you consider to be saving. Because if we're thinking about a conflict situation, say in Iraq, where you have artifacts in the ground, pretty much the best place for them is in the ground, just staying there. These aren't artifacts that are necessarily going to be destroyed otherwise. They're just hanging out inside an archaeological site. But market demand, the fact that somebody is going to buy this on the market end, is what's causing the looting. So protection drops out, the economy falls, the place is in chaos. You only turn to archaeological looting because you can get a buck for it. So in a sense, the worst has happened. The objects aren't being saved by the market. The market is the thing that's threatening the objects. It's threatening the objects, it's threatening the archological context. Again, you can neutralize it a bit more and say that, it's still on it's on the market already. The looting's already happened. I'm going to save it from the market. But again, you're creating this demand. You're continuing the.
It confirms the fact that there is a demand for this. So let's dig more.
You
mentioned conflict several times, and I think that's incredibly important. And there's a couple of questions I have. The first one, though, I believe this has been published. I know it's been published, actually. I've had students look at it, but I saw a fantastic SAA paper by one of the trafficking culture folks on, I think it's in Cambodia, and how you had different sides of a conflict looting at different times. Can you talk about that case a little, or that principle?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is research done by my colleagues Simon McKenzie and Tess Davis. And Tess in particular have been working in Cambodia for about 10 years, but the two of them paired up archaeologist, lawyer, and a criminologist, and reconstructed some of the main looting pathways out of Cambodia into Thailand and into the rest of the world. And a lot of their research showed that as conflict hit in Cambodia, as different militarized groups moved around, as the Khmer Rouge grew in power, then retreated into the jungle, as they held areas, different types of looting occurred and different looting pathways occurred. And it was very much tied to this type of instability. And what they've seen in Cambodia as it's moved towards stability after the Khmer Rouge, after the 90s, looting's gone way down. It's gotten significantly better. So looting is often very tied to just a loss of control. When there's control, there tends to be better monitoring.
I mean, the very first, if I remember correctly, the very first memorandum of understanding under the UNESCO Charter that the United States signed was, and I know this because we're there, was with El Salvador during their civil war.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. The other question
because
I wanted
again, it's a time of sensitivity. It's when things are most sensitive.
Yeah. The other question I wanted to ask in regards to conflict, specifically in the Hobby Lobby case, some of the news reports have been tying this into the much discussed in the public sphere antiquities looting and destruction by Islamic State. And we just had Nathan French on about this, but a lot of the activities we're talking, I actually asked him about this the other day, a lot of the activities we're talking about with the Hobby Lobby case are before sort of the declaration of a caliphate by Islamic State. On the other hand, the roots of the various organizations that become Islamic State go back before. Do we have any idea, and the answer is probably, given there's no provenience, on who's maybe doing the kind of looting that ends up potentially feeding into the sort of networks that Hobby Lobby was purchasing?
So the idea that Islamic State, like who we think of as the Islamic State now, was involved in the Antiquities. In this case, it's pretty much zero chance because the timing doesn't work out. That's just not what was happening.
Right.
I'm choosing my words carefully because, as you said, there's not a lot known, particularly about what's been going on in Iraq and Syria with Islamic State, about how much involvement they actually had or not, whether just kind of on the surface or, they're I'm going to say they're probably not actually doing the digging.
That's the conclusion we came to. That's the conclusion we came to in our interview with Dr. French, was maybe they were collecting tax on some of these activities, but it doesn't seem like it's not a significant part.
Can you imagine them sitting outside in the hot sun to get some cylinder seals out of the ground?
No, that's what we came up with. Yeah.
But the looting in the region has been problematic for a long time and extremely problematic at certain key points. So looting got really quite bad in Iraq after the first Gulf War, so immediately after the first Gulf War. And then into the later 90s, things got a bit better. The Hussein government actually kind of got things a bit better under control, started refunding archaeology, allowed foreign archaeologists back again, so sites were being monitored better. Okay, fast forward a bit to 2000, all order is falling apart. The economy drops out. Nobody's in charge of anything. And pretty much immediately after Americans' troops arrive in 2003, looting starts hitting big. And into that summer, you start getting aerial photography and helicopter photographs showing sites being massively looted. And as far as our research has shown, and I should say this is mostly research coming from my colleague Neil Brody, also on the Trafficking Culture Project. Up until about 2007, 2008, looting was really quite bad in Iraq. This is when unrest was at its height. There was all sorts of conflict and unrest there. And the economy was just kind of in the gutter. There was no Iraqi economy. And following 2008, things got better and looting slows down again because people can earn money in some better way than digging holes in the ground in the hot. So it's very likely, and I'm going to say this, I'm caging a bit, it's very likely that the collection we're talking about Greens had came out of Iraq at that time.
Yeah.
They're the product of, exactly. They're the product of this looting post 2003 and before 2008. And the fact that the items were still in the Middle East, in the UAE and so on, just kind of shows that might be the case. It also starts to answer this big question that we've had since that looting 2003 and onward, which is, where did the stuff go?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of the stuff out. Clearly there's holes in the ground. Clearly there's tons of holes in the ground. Sites were completely looted, but where did it end up? Again, Neil Brody's research showed that it wasn't necessarily hitting the open market in any big avalanche. So where did it go? So maybe the answer, as I say again, maybe, that it got concentrated in these large collections that were just waiting for us. So sitting around in places like somewhere in the UAE, waiting for the right person to come along who, say, needed to outfit a whole museum, say wanted a particular collection of this kind of stuff, and was willing to kind of look the other way about the shady aspects of it.
And also maybe
So
to give a little more time, since there was a lot of media attention on the looting.
Right. There's been enough time passed, or clearly there hasn't enough time passed because this got called out. But the perception that, if this came out around 2003, it sold around 2011, it's not as hot anymore. And remember, 2010, 2011 is kind of before this new ISIS idea, so it wasn't so much in the news.
Right.
The idea that Iraqi antiquities were tainted was still there. It kind of had waned just a little bit. So there you go.
Could it also have tied? I thought you mentioned 2009. Could it also have tied into the global economic downturn in terms of you would see this in the 30s with people who were wealthy selling their stuff off because they needed money.
Well, see, that sounds like a wonderful story that everybody could have shared in this antiquities dealership about where the objects came from.
Oh, yeah.
And while
true.
they're not, see that's one of these false provenances. This is like an anonymous Swiss collector. There's an anonymous Swiss collector who's dealing with an economic downturn and does not want his city known.
Yep.
So you can buy this stuff on the cheap. This is where those myths kind of get built around these ideas of the economic downturn. Economic downturn seems to be certainly correlated with looting, even in non-conflict situations. So if you think the lowest level of society who has lost their economic means and so on, but it also creates this perfect front, this perfect reason. There's suddenly this huge collection of tablets for sale at the low price of however many millions he paid.
Excellent.
Here's a question I have. Is there, and this might lead into the fake artifacts also getting into the market, this whole concept of he's starting this museum, he's obviously going to want certain kinds of artifacts for display. Is there evidence of people hitting the market with a shopping list and these shopping lists being fulfilled? And if so, do we see an uptick in certain kinds of artifacts being looted in these kind of situations, or is there any way to really tell?
I think the answer here is yes.
Okay.
There are a couple of discrete cases where the purchasing decisions and the purchasing orders, the things a particular collector has seemingly inspired looting for that kind of object.
Okay.
So there was one case, for example, that so-and-so really likes ancient armor, and then certain sites that might have ancient armor are hit. In the Maya region, of course, this is something that I'm sure you know about. In the Maya region, this kind of upturn in the market for Maya vases, and particular people who want to buy Maya vases, seems to have directly inspired the looting of the kind of areas that Maya vases would be found. Mm-hmm. So in this situation, and whether this occurred or not, I can't say. I'm hedging again here. A major buyer with a lot of money who is seeking a certain type of object, and in this case we're talking about objects from biblical regions that have writing on them, so objects with writing on them, seems to inspire looting to fulfill those needs, because it trickles down the supply chain. If there's a clear and quite wealthy market for this kind of thing, where there's a demand, the supply is going to be found.
Okay.
So were this collection of objects specifically looted for this guy? Probably not. But as a new buyer appears on this event, is very publicly saying, I want stuff with biblical stuff with writing on them, that happens. And that's also where, of course, like you were saying, you get fakes.
Yeah.
Because you get looting to fill this need, you also get fakes to fill this need. Because you might have individuals who want very biblical things, very biblically looking things that fulfill this need. And there are opportunists who will go for that.
How much does the fake artifact industry impact the illegal trade?
I think it's a huge issue. Indeed, the idea of fakes seems to be what buyers actually care about. There's a strong value in authenticity when we're talking about ancient past. Obviously, as academics, that's an issue. But for actual buyers, they want the real thing. Part of the reason for owning it is touching this ancient past being part of it.
Right.
So they're really concerned about buying fakes. And if you look at sales of antiquities, if you look at auction catalogs, if you look at dealerships, their obsession is not with assuring the buyer that this is a legal antiquity. Their obsession is assuring the buyer that this is an authentic antiquity. So it's a huge market thing. All these various scientific techniques that are applied to the object are trying to increase the value of objects on the market, showing they're real. And you often get provenance, like the most amount of provenance information, so ownership history, any history that shows who owned it previously, that tends to be presented not to show that it's legal, that it left its country of origin after a certain date or after the UNESCO convention, but to show that it has a history going back to before maybe the type of object was fake.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense.
Right.
So the obsession on the market is authenticity, not legality.
Gotcha.
That helps explain some I've shown to my students where they have these statements of where they got it, and it's after charter, and I'm like, what are they doing? Like literally, they're like, oh, we follow UNESCO, and then they're like, we obtained this in 1990. I'm like, what are you doing? But that actually helps answer that. So cool.
Yeah, and it's also where you see when a lot of these intermediaries, these middlemen, these people who are trafficking these antiquities through cleansing them for the market, when they go down, when they get arrested, they often have photographs of the objects that they've dealt with before they're restored, with dirt on them coming out of the ground, and you think, why do you keep these things? Why on earth are you that stupid? But it actually proves how real. So if you share that photograph of it dirty with dirt on it, some pick marks, you're actually showing that this is an authentic object. So I think it becomes almost a selling point.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a conversation for a different podcast, but there's a recent article from ArtNet News about, the headline is, a staggering 96% of the artifacts in San Francisco's Mexican Museum may be fake. The report found that only 83 of 2,000 of the museum's pre-Columbian artifacts could be authentic.
Wow.
Yeah,
I saw that. I'm going to blog about that pretty much the moment we get off the air here. I'm all over that.
Is that kind of a thing? I mean, how should we feel about that?
Well, I saw some of the pictures and they were hilarious.
Jeb can back me up. Yeah, I'm sure Jeb can back me up, and the answer is not surprising.
Okay.
So
I mean,
Jeb, are they obviously fake?
Well, I mean, I went and looked at the pictures.
Yeah.
I went and looked at the pictures. And some of them, I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, some of them, well, that's an amusing bit looking thing. So there's a lot of figurines, and some of them are interesting looking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's this actually, we've been talking a lot about, provenience, and I think it wouldn't be an archaeological fantasies podcast if we didn't have a really silly story to add to this very serious issue. But a few years ago, there was a video documentary made about the Michigan relic, series of fakes from Michigan found late 19th, early 20th centuries. The documentary is called History or Hoax, and they interviewed Wayne May in that documentary. He's the editor of Ancient American magazine, highly diffusionist. And in that his interview, he holds up an oil lamp that he claims he picked up at an estate sale in Virginia or West Virginia. And this is completely unprovenience. And his impression is that this actually, since it was bought by him in West Virginia or Virginia, that's where it was found, proving that ancient Israelites had been in Virginia in antiquity. And it was kind of hilarious. But that very oil lamp, you can go on a number of websites that sell authentic oil lamps from the Holy Land, and you can buy them for a couple of $100. I wonder, it's hilarious that even when we're talking about really low level traffic in antiquities, this stuff can end up without any provenience, without any record of where the hell it came from or where it was purchased, and suddenly you've got somebody claiming, well, no, this actually is evidence of transatlantic visitation from the Holy Land 2,000 years ago.
Oh gosh.
Well,
but I should say, these kind of low-level objects, these tiny lamps and things like that, those are the big unknown when it comes to antiquities trafficking. We're talking about museum-level objects. The feds only go after these really high-end objects, but there is a huge undercurrent. There's a huge market for these smaller objects that I could easily afford, that anybody could easily afford.
Right.
That are sold online, that are sold in small dealerships, that represent exactly the same level of archaeological destruction,
right,
but are treated as less seriously than the big ticket items. And I feel like there's been not enough research done on that, not enough focus on that. And if anybody's looking for a PhD right there, that's something to look for.
And not only is there less attention on them, they're so much easier. I mean, I've read, it may be by you or your colleague, of practices where, because it's generic oil lamp number 47, you need is a copy of the same export or customs or document, and you just change the number because it's another generic oil lamp.
Right, yeah. I'm on a website. That's
research from Morag Purcell, I should say, at DePaul University and University of Chicago. Shout out to her work. But yeah, that's coming from her research in Israel.
Yeah, I'm on a website right now where for $200 you can buy a crucifixion nail.
Wow!
If that turns you on.
Was it?
I read a really fun
price.
article one time when I was doing some research for articles I wrote back in the past about there are so many pieces of wood from the quote-unquote biblical cross that if you were to put them all together, the cross itself would be something like 100 feet tall and like astronomically wide. There's so many pieces of it.
You could build a museum for the cross.
Right, out of the cross, no less.
Yes, yeah.
Well, there's that faking.
Yeah. Final thoughts on the illegals antiquities trade, Donna?
It's a vast and difficult thing, but however much we might criticize in this case the nobody getting jail time or anything, I think the publicity around it is really important, because every time there's a media frenzy around a case like this, it becomes more and more difficult for, say, a collector to say that they didn't know that this was wrong. It becomes less and less believable. And it kind of makes the collecting of antiquities not so socially acceptable. And that's one of my big goals, is to try to change hearts and minds around this. I think that's what will make a dent in this demand.
Ken, any final thoughts?
Sure. No, I'm back on the crucifixion. Would those make appropriate? Would those make appropriate presents for Christmas, you think? I'll leave it at that.
Ken, too soon. Too soon.
Yeah, no, but you're right.
Is this going to be in your new child's Easter basket?
Oh. I'm getting so much hate.
This is really bad. Yeah.
This has been really important and really great, and it just, the Hobby Lobby. That also, we haven't mentioned this. They're the group that was at the core of that case where they want to pay for their contraception for their employees. And the thing is, if they're really devout, the 10 Commandments are really important too, right? And thou shalt not covet and thou shalt not steal. I think that those are kind of important elements of the 10 Commandments, and yet they seem to have violated both of those. I'm just saying.
But Ken, the greater good.
I guess that's what it must be.
Jeb, you got final thoughts on this?
I just would like to thank Donna for coming on the show and talking about this. And more important, well, I don't know about more importantly, but at least more importantly for the work I do with my students and so forth. Thank you so much for all your work on trafficking culture. That is traffickingculture.org is a fantastic resource on all of this. You have case studies, you have links and information on laws. Anybody with that out there, anybody's like, I don't know, this is wrong, I don't know anything about this, is really not a believable person.
Right.
Thank you.
And personally, I think they should give Donna she should have her own badge.
Her badge.
You know? Archaeology. Can walk into places, show that badge. You know.
Oh, that's great. Archaeology. I had in Bolivia, I had an archaeology card that had my picture on it that was laminated, so it's kind of like that, but then I lost it.
Well, lamination makes it official, so.
Yes.
It kind of does.
It does.
But
had a government stamp.
Absolutely.
Donna, thank you so much for coming on to the show. This has been a great topic. I'm sure we will have you back on in the future to clarify something else for us as well. So,
the next scandal, I'm there.
Because you know there will be one.
Thank you.
There will be one.
But again, thank you so much for coming on to the show, and thank you guys for being on the call.
As one will call. No, we don't do a dinosaur.
Thanks for listening. We hope you've enjoyed it. Our music was provided by Archaeosuit Productions. If you like what you've heard, Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Stitcher and share us wherever you use social media. You can contact us with your questions, comments, or angry email at archifantasies@gmail.com. You can follow the podcast at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archifantasies. You can follow the blog at www.archifantasies.com and get updates on Tumblr and Twitter at Archifantasies. You can also look for us on Facebook. If you're looking for the show notes for this episode, go to the podcast website at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archifantasies. Thanks again for listening.
No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. We don't do dinosaurs.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Save big money on pressure-treated lumber for your outdoor project at Menards. Menards has the best in-stock selection of AC2 pressure-treated lumber, decking, and fencing. All easy to load in our drive-through lumber yard. Choose from our huge inventory and build your project to last. Plus, you can get free estimates fast with our fence and deck design programs in-store or online at menards.com.
Save big money at Menards.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Oh, 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 O'Reilly.